You've got it all, the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience. Say me, I'm just starting on the ladder. A mere apprentice. It's like Leonardo da.
Ah. Oh, that's better. Welcome to the Podmaster channel. So, perhaps we should get away from all the drama. A story time video. My time working for an escort agency, driving the girls around. So, for those that don't know, I've been a grave digger for about 20 years. Although I've had jobs before, after and during that time. And so I was about 18 months in to grave digging. I was really into the bodybuilding, believe it or not, back then, 30 years ago. And I needed some more money, and grave digging doesn't exactly go well with training in a gym, you know, because most of a grave digger's life is actually cutting grass, so that's not particularly good for putting on size like. Anyway, I was looking for extra work, so we used to get free newspapers, like local newspapers come through the door, and some of them had jobs in, so I was looking at the back pages and sort of services merging with jobs. So you had all the like escort agencies advertising, and I see one that was advertising for drivers. So I rang it, but unfortunately they didn't need any, they'd already filled the job like so. But I rang round a few, didn't think much more of it. A couple of hours went by, later on that evening the phone went, and it was one of the agencies. They said, we'll give you a tryout, one of our drivers hasn't turned up. So I thought, yeah, okay then. So I went over there. It was a flat above a betting shop in Leighton, in the High Street. You parked down a little side street to get into the flat. The door was there and the stairs. So I went up the stairs into the flat, and for the first time met Arthur. Arthur, the guy who ran the agency. So basically his sister, I think she lived in Chelmsford, she would man the phones. So remember back then it was only, most people just had house phones, you know, mobiles were only just sort of coming out in giant brick things. So she would take the calls, verify the addresses, and then phone the jobs through to Arthur. And Arthur actually, his agency was one of the few that actually had a base where everybody would meet. Most of them, all you ever hear is like a phone. You just sit in your cars, basically, and it was all done by phone. But no, Arthur's one, you had a proper base. I mean, there was a few agencies that did, but there's also quite a few that didn't. So, what was Arthur like? He looked like a rock star, to be honest, like an ageing rock star. I guess he was maybe late 30s, early 40s, about 5'10", gaunt, really thin, gaunt, but really long hair. Like it was back in like, if anyone remembers like a Kevin Keegan perm, but a lot of rock stars perm, so really, really long, fair, permed hair, like 3/4 of the way down his back. He used to walk around in a big long, like Crombie coat, like these are sort of, they're like half-sized like cowboy boots, cowboy heels, like that's what they used to. That used to be quite fashionable in the 90s, like late 80s, early 90s. So he was really laid back though. He was really, yeah, he was good to the girls. I mean, he was never nasty to any of them. He never pushed any of them to do anything. Yeah, he was pretty cool. So anyway, I was living at home at the time, and it didn't particularly go down well with my mother, my new occupation. So I ended up moving out and moving into the flat above the betting shop where we all met. So, and living there was I mean, I was as green as Tom Jones's grass, really. I had a middle class, really sheltered upbringing. I remember the internet wasn't around. Well, not like it is now. So no social media, nothing like that. No sat navs. So that made the job harder, trying to find addresses with a MacBook in the middle of the night, and it led to a few rows. Yeah, so, sorry, had to stop the video for a sec because of someone. So yeah, people were a lot more naive back then, I think. I certainly was. Really sheltered, single child upbringing, middle class. I wasn't even allowed to play on the council estates. My mother was so... I was adopted, actually. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject. Yeah, I mean, I'd been around drugs in the gym world, like the gym steroids, stuff like that. I wasn't shy in that regard, but I didn't even smoke back then. So as soon as I went in that flat, from the very first night, it was just a fog of cannabis, all the, you know, and it didn't take long for me to realise a lot of them were taking trips, and Arthur certainly was, and some of the drivers, they were taking trips, a lot of the ones that weren't actually driving that night. So they'd sit there and do that. And that was like almost from day one. I mean, they had a fridge there. There weren't much in this flat. There was like a bedroom and a front room to it that looked out onto the High Street. Like I said, it was above a betting office. And they had a Smileys for all the rage back then, trips, little smiley, little tabs. And they had a whole sheet of them in the fridge. So people just used to help themselves to it. I don't know how many's on this sheet, probably 100. But, so that, I remember the first job I took, the first girl I took out, Tiffany was the name she was using. Glenda, I think, was her real name, I'm not sure. But she was mixed race, she was black and Indian, really striking looking. She had false boobs, which a client of hers had paid for. She drove around in a nice white Golf convertible that someone else had paid for, another client. So I took her out. Yeah, and that went all right. I think I did a couple of jobs. I don't remember much about a lot of the jobs. I remember one of the embarrassing things, actually, well, it was for me anyway, was a lot of the time they always used to they'd always take condoms with them, but sometimes I wouldn't buy them right until the last minute. So on the way, and there was this particular, I think it was going out Hertfordshire way, because a lot of these counties are pretty close. It was the A10, I remember that. And we stopped at a garage, and I was to dread it. She said to me, "Oh, can you get us some packet of condoms?" Oh, all right. So I went in there. Indian guy behind the counter, and paid for the petrol, got these condoms. Anyway, we went and done the job. I think that was pretty eventful. Came back, went back to the base in Leighton. And later on that night, I had to take another woman out, Sue. And Sue was in her 50s. She had her head screwed on with money because she bought a house with her money. She was a dancing girl years ago back in Holland, in Amsterdam, on the stages. I don't know what sort of stages they were, but she was a proper dancing girl. So she was quite fit, for early 50s. And I had to take her on a job. And again, I don't really remember the job, but I do remember stopping again at the same garage, believe it or not, the same garage later on that night. And she asked me again, "Oh, can you get me a packet of condoms?" Oh. So I had to go in, same guy serving. And what he must have thought, because nobody thought lucky bugger like, because he'd seen me with one woman before, earlier on, and then he sees me a couple of hours later with another one, buying another packet of condoms. So he must have thought I was some sort of stud or something. Yeah, so And another story I remember was Sue. Sorry, this story's a bit disjointed. It's the first one I've told, isn't it? And I hope it's not boring everyone to death. But yeah, when you hear about with Carly and the Sean Atwood stuff, that it makes it sound like all these women are victims. Well, no doubt some of them were victims of, some sort of abuse. Normally, in some cases it came from boyfriends. I know White Carol, her name was, her boyfriend used to put her out from Manchester. Her boyfriend used to make her go on the streets to feed his drug habit and then beat the crap out of her. Till one day he went too far, kicked one of her ribs through her lung, and she got away from him and came down. I think she knew some of the other girls, and she came down and stayed at Arthur's. So to go forward a bit, the three of us, me, Arthur and Carol, because she became his girlfriend in the end, we all sort of chipped in and moved from that flat to a house later on. But that's pushing the story forward a bit. So I don't think I met any of the escorts that I would say were victims. Certainly none were trafficked. None apart from when Carol was in Manchester. None of them were forced to do it. Arthur was brilliant with them. He was never he never was nasty to any of them. He was just a real laid-back kind of guy, really. Very private. He never used to like anyone really knowing what he was doing. He'd disappear for hours on end, days on end sometimes. Yeah, but most of the one of the girls, she was a nurse. She used to come from I won't say particularly where, but she used to come up at weekends. Her husband knew she had kids, and she just did it for the money, literally for the money. Another one just for the adventure of it. I didn't really meet any that I would call victims. If anything, blimey, you wouldn't want to upset any of them. Remember, in a way, it's quite a safe thing to be doing, because A, you're with a driver, because you're there to look after them as well, and B, back then, it was all through house phones. So you're hardly going to kick off in your own premises late at night in a residential area, aren't you? Most of these jobs were in houses. There was a few in blocks of flats, but normally I'd go and wait in the stairwell, which I didn't really like doing, hanging about in the bloody stairwell, but I only had to do that a couple of times. We nearly got, one of us could have got killed actually on one job. Tanya, her name was, took her. Tanya was, she had two kids, really, really polite and nice kids. She was really bringing them up well. And she used to get a babysitter in and then go to work when she needed money. She only really did it when she needed the money. She wasn't, she never had any money. She'd do that job, but she used to call herself a destitute prostitute. She never had much. Whereas some of them, they had their heads screwed on with it. They'd be buying houses with the money, and I think apart from there was I only met a few that didn't actually have kids. Yeah, so some of them had their heads screwed on, just did it for the money basically. And like I say, I never met any of them that had been abused apart from Carol. But as I say, her boyfriend was a crack addict and used to make her go out on the streets to feed his habit. So she only put up with that for so long, like I said, till he nearly killed her. But and then unfortunately she had I will tell you that, because there's going to be a part 2 to this. She nearly got killed by a suspected serial killer later on. She did survive. So I don't want you to think all that, I was driving around victims. I wasn't. So there was never any problems on any of the jobs really. The only time there was one problem, one of the girls, it was a bit too close for home. It was in Plaistow, right whole of her place in East London. And the guy, his son and daughter-in-law, had got him a escort for his birthday, and they were there in the flat. It was in a block of flats. So I was waiting outside because it was in flats on the stairs. And this guy, it turned out, knew her mum and got a bit nasty with her and said he was going to sort her driver out, but then when he came out and spoke to me, he was fine. I said, no problems, mate, she won't be much longer. And then when she came out, he was down in the car and she started crying. So that's when she told me what he'd said to her. So that wasn't very good. And then on another flat, I was starting to talk about that with Tanya. It was a block of flats and she went right up the top. I think it was about 19, 20 floors, and Tanya was really, you'd have to, it'd be the other way around, you'd have to save the client from her. She was really kind of, you wouldn't want to upset her. And anyway, he did. Like, the guy, I think, was drunk. Anyway, she came straight back down, basically. And we're walking, I walked over to her as she's coming out of the flats. I walked her to the flats, but I didn't go right up the top. I went back to the car, waited, and when I see her coming out, I walked back over to meet her. And as we're walking back towards the car, a can of lager exploded behind us. He dropped it like a full can from about the 19th, 20th floor. So it just went off like a bomb. And she said, "That's you effing so-and-so." Yeah, so that was, it was certainly an eye-opener to be thrown into that world. As you might be curious, did I meet any male escorts? Well, no, but Arthur, he used to go out. I know he did, at least he used to do if any women rang up, which was very rare, but if any did, he would go and do that. But he went to one, I know, and Arthur wasn't into big women, and she was a rather big woman, and I think he managed to give her a massage, and then she asked him for oral sex, and I know he said to her, I haven't got a condom big enough for me head, love. So that didn't go very well. But I know he went to a Chinese woman. She was a businesswoman, really nice looking, and she just didn't have time for boyfriends, so she just employed male escorts. So that one went much better for Arthur. And he had another, I never met him, but he had another male escort that he used to ring up and give work to, who Arthur said to me, he swears blind he's not gay, but he services any of the men that ring up. And I know he was having a go at Arthur about sending him to some big fat hairy guy. Anyway, and one night I actually managed to get, that's one story I could tell, I got paid myself. It was with Sue, the woman I was just talking about, the one who'd been a dancer. Yeah, we went out and she'd had a drink by then, because most of them had used cannabis, some of them, not many of them drunk really, but most of them would use cannabis or trips or something or other to do the job. But Sue, it was alcohol mainly, and the later in the evening it got, the worse she became. Anyway, we went out, got this call to go out right in the middle of nowhere, in Essex somewhere, in some booming village. The guy we actually had to phone him on the way. It was that hard to find, and he talked us in to get there. He'd gone inside, we see him sort of disappear inside as we got there. Massive house, right at the big long driveway, really nice quiet road. So I've parked right outside in the street, and she's tottered off up this driveway to the house. And geez, about 10 minutes later she comes back, and I thought, oh God, all that aggro and all that way for nothing, he doesn't want her. And she's got back in the car and she looked at me and said, now he wants you to come in a minute, she said, because he wants you to go to the bank and draw some money out with his bank card. And she said, now, two things. She said, don't look at me and don't laugh. And don't look at me because if you do, I shall laugh. Because you remember I'm talking 30 years ago, you know, people were naive back then. But she said, he's sitting there in a dress with all makeup on and that. She said, you won't laugh, will you? I said, no, I won't laugh. I'll just go and get his money. So that's what I did. Went in, got his bank card. Sure enough, he's doled up to the nines. I've gone off found it was a little village. Went in, found a cash point, got his money, went back, went in again, and they're sitting there on the settee with some porn film going. And she said, don't go straight away. She said, just sit down for a minute with us. Oh God. So I'm sitting there, he's sitting there in his dress and that wig, makeup on, and completely out of the blue, not long after telling me to sit down, she said, he wants you to have, well, I'll word it differently to the way she worded it, but she said he wants you to have sex with me for 100 quid while he watches. Will you do it? Oh, can you imagine? I'm 25, like she's in her 50s. I was like a Rodney Trotter kind of, well, not in appearance, but like a Rodney Trotter kind of character. And she said that. She said, will you have sex with me for £100 while he sits and watches? And she said, don't worry, I won't let him touch you. She said, he just wants to lean on the end of the bed and watch. So, I mean, remember I used to take home, back then, grave digging, I think I was taking home £130 a week then, back in 1990. Yeah, it must have been about around £130 a week, and he's just offered me 100 quid. So I did, but I couldn't even get it up, to be honest. She just got on top of me, bounced up and down for about a minute. I'm surprised he even put up with it. got off. Oh, he's finished all, you know. I won't go into it, but it was terrible. Anyway, I earned that. I got that. I'm not earned, but I got that 100 quid. I think I earned 170 quid that night because I'd done a couple of jobs or one afterwards. 170 quid for one night, and I used to take home £130 a week. Which reminds me, we could talk about the money side of it. Because of that Sean Atwood, the Carly thing, where she was going on about she charges, was it 11,000 quid or 1,100 quid a night? Well, 30 years later, it hasn't changed. They used to get £100 every half hour. That's what they used to charge. £100 every half hour. So the escort would get 55, the driver 25, and the agency 20. And the thing was, if you took two girls, then as a driver, your money would double. So for two girls for half an hour, they would both get £100 each, and you would get 25 off of one and 25 off the other for driving. So, although it doesn't sound much, 25 quid a job, if it went to an hour, that's 50 quid. If you've got two girls with you, went to an hour, that's 100 quid. And like I said, 130 quid was a week's wages. So you imagine you could earn that in a night. In fact, there was a recession in the late 80s, I think, just before I got into that escort thing. But I got told the drivers alone on a Friday and Saturday night used to earn 1,000 quid for 2 days' work. You know, when it was really busy. I managed to get into it when it wasn't really busy. That's why I haven't got a ton of stories like, but yeah, so if you took that £100 and half an hour, it hasn't changed now, is it? 1,100 quid for a night. I mean, they might give you a discount for a night. But as a driver, you could see how it could add up. you know, especially if you had two girls with you. I mean, one job, a business rang them up and they had some they were having a conference, whatever it was, and it was like an after party. They wanted, I don't know how many girls it was, probably 6 or something like that, 6 or 8, something like that, girls. And 2, well, of course Arthur was bound to be. I mean, he didn't drive very often, but if a job come up like that, then he was going to be there. So he took about 4, and I think one of the other guys took 4. He had an estate car. So you can imagine, and they're there for hours and hours, right the way through the night, sitting there. They've taken 4 girls, so they're on, you know, like £200 an hour, something like that, even £100 an hour for all night. But I was unlucky, I never got any of those sort of jobs. Anyway, we stayed at the flat, not for long. As I say, Carol ended up as Arthur's girlfriend, and the 3 of us decided we'd move and get a house in Chingford. Not a million miles from where the Crays are buried, actually, just down the road from Chingford Mount. Literally the shops were in walking distance from the house. So the 3 of us chipped in for the rent, although I'm never sure if Arthur ever actually paid the rent. He certainly took the money for it, but I don't know if he ever paid it. We didn't stay there that long either, but it was quite a nice house. And I got a dog, Max, rescue dog, collie cross retriever. Yeah, because we was in a house, and I always wanted a dog. I bought a dog. And he was alright, so there was me, Arthur, Carol and Max. And I'll tell you how laid back Arthur was. We all went out one day, and he'd left his coat, because I think it was a hot day, left his coat indoors, his favourite black long coat. And when we got back, he had about 3 or 4 buttons missing off of it, because Max had chewed them off. And he never went mad at all, he just sort of laughed. I couldn't believe it, he just laughed about it. And that was an expensive coat, he bloody dogette. So, yeah, one of the things though, it was awkward. What do you tell the neighbours? Because people coming and going, aren't we, in the middle of the night? Carol told them that we were customs officers. Well, that was an unusual one. Yeah, customs officers. That's why we go on different shifts, she said. So we're often in and out. We have people, friends over at weird times, and they're customs officers as well. So. Actually, the neighbours never really questioned that. Anyway, we stayed in that house, I don't know how long it was, a month or 2. I think we ended up moving because I'm pretty sure Arthur never actually paid the rent. He just put it in his pocket, knowing him. Then we moved to a flat. From that house, we moved to a flat in Goodmays, a place called Goodmays. Near Ilford, still in Essex, and it was an upstairs flat, and we got to know the woman who had the downstairs flat. I think her name was Tracy, and she had a boyfriend who used to come and stay weekends, whose name was Eamon, and that will lead us into the second part of the story. I'll talk more about Eamon, because he was involved in the drug world, and we'll have a chat about Arthur's downfall, which then caused my downfall, of course. So that'd be for the second part. But as for this part, I haven't got any really flamboyant stories to tell about this time. It was just an interesting world to be in. I remember one job we went to, that was another one to come to me, Tanya again. This guy had an agency himself. He was down on the coast, and he wanted to be dominated, but he didn't want any of his own girls doing it. Or maybe he didn't want them knowing about it. So we went to his house, and it was a residential street, quite late at night. I'm parked outside, and because it was the summer, you could hear it. You could hear him telling him to crawl around the floor like a dog. I mean, God knows what anyone must have thought walking past, because I was sitting in the car and I could hear him having a go at him and that, dominating him with a whip and all the rest of it. So all that kind of thing goes on. I mean, I've known guys spend £700-800 on just loads of girls. We had one guy, Mr. Cox his name was, he was the only guy that they would let the client take one of the girls away from the driver. So we used to meet him in a car park. It was a lorry park on the way to Canby Island, I think, down that way. And he would take the girl away, and he had a. I mean, he used to like the girls to. He used to like laying under a table, a glass table, while they defecated on the table. So only certain girls would even entertain going to see him. He wanted, Nikki, her name was the nurse, he wanted, he got more adventurous later on, because that was the only other time although it didn't happen in the end, he wanted to experiment, and he wanted to watch while one of the drivers had sex with one of the girls that's where he wanted it, in the cemetery. That's where he wanted to walk. And she was asking me if I'd do it next time with her, like if he asked. So I said yeah, but it never happened. She was nice, Nikki. That was the nurse. Yeah, the whole thing went more into the drugs though. It went all downhill. Arthur went downhill. He was a strange character, very, very, like I say, he was very shady. He'd been in prison. I know he'd been in prison because he ran a load of people over outside a nightclub. He'd had some trouble. And his answer to that was to jump in his car and run them over, basically. So he'd been in prison. And I know he's terrified of going back, so he'd do anything to avoid that, which he did in the end. Avoid. He kind of abandoned his friends, shall we say. Me and someone else. Me and Eamon, actually. We helped him out in a big way. And he disappeared after, but we'll get into that in the second part of this. I'll only make these story times short because I'm sorry, but I can't, fluff the stories out with any. They've got to be accurate, I can't. I could make these really elaborate and get thousands of views, but sorry, I have to be truthful. So we'll do a part 2 soon, if you want. I'll catch you later.